Hi everybody. My name is Justin. I am from River Valley Alliance Church, Watertown, Wisconsin. I will be taking the Sunday school lesson today on April 19th. I think that's when the lesson's going to be. Usually it's Caleb that takes this, and we wanted to give him a week off, so spend some time with his family. So I'll be taking the lesson today. So let's go ahead and get started. And shall we do that? Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 6, verse 45 to 53, and we're going to be looking at fear. So here we are. I guess to start us out then, maybe you can think in your life, have you ever been afraid? Maybe you're afraid of lots of things. Maybe you're afraid all the time. Maybe you're afraid of spiders. Maybe you're afraid of bats or heights, or maybe you've got claustrophobia, fear of small things. Hey, maybe you've got like agoraphobia, fear of going outside, or whatever it might be. My daughter is terrified of spiders. She is terrified of spiders. Wow. A spider will be anywhere. The tiniest, smallest spider will be in her bedroom, and she will not be in her bedroom. She will leave. She can spot a spider from any distance in any type of light. She can see a spider in the corner of the smallest room at the darkest of night, and it might be the smallest spider you have ever seen, and Grace will still know that there is a spider there. It's like she has some kind of sixth spider sense that tells her there's a spider in there somewhere. There might have been at some point, and she's terrified. Absolutely does not go near spiders. Grace will not go in our basement at all, ever, because there was a spider there once, and it was the smallest thing ever. But the fact is, there might be another one. One day there might be another one. So Grace does not go into our basement. I don't know about you. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of roller coasters. Really big ones. Really big roller coasters. Actually, any roller coaster. I'm scared of the little ones. Tiny ones. So when I was 13, I went on a roller coaster once. My dad took me to like an amusement park. It was like Six Flags, I guess, in England, and we all went on. My brother, my dad, and I. And it's really cool to start with. Everything's looking great and exciting, and you get on, and everything's cool and it's exciting, and you go up and you start climbing, and you start climbing, and you start climbing, and at this point everything's okay. This is good. Never been on a roller coaster before. This is exciting stuff, and up we went, and that was great. But then, oh my goodness, then the stupid thing starts to go downhill fast, really, really fast, and nobody tells you. Nobody tells you that the first time you start going down fast like that your whole body is about to empty of itself, that you will be just a shell. There will be no substance within inside you. You are jelly. It is gone. It's like someone sucked out your entire innards and left them on the floor. Nobody tells you that. Nobody. It's just expected. Well, I didn't. Oh, I hated it. I mean, I hated it. I hate pickles, but this was not pickles. I hated it. This was scary, real scary. I remember being so scared. I sat there and I thought, this is not an option for me. I was terrified. So I decided it was time to get off. So I remember, the bars are thin, the kind of things they put over you. And I was thinking, I'm just getting off. I'm done. And the thing is wrong. I didn't notice that the thing was still going. As far as I'm concerned, we're getting off. And so I slipped through those bars and I stood up and I was ready to start climbing. My dad clung onto me for dear life, shouting at me, screaming at me, stop. I never went on a roller coaster again after that. Fear does that sort of thing to you. Never again. So, yeah, that's my experience. But let's look together, shall we? We're going to look at Mark chapter 6, verse 45 to 53. That's Mark chapter 6, verse 45 to 53. And while you find that together, I'm going to read it out together. I've got the NIV. This story is about fear. It's about fear, and it's about peace. in some really strange and uncomfortable circumstances. And we're going to look at these things a little bit today. And so we're going to read that. And just before I start reading it, I want you to ponder something in your mind. Peace is a fruit of the Spirit, and we all know that. Peace, love, joy, peace, it's a fruit of the Spirit. Did you ever wonder why peace is a fruit of the Spirit? Why is that? We'll get back to that later. Let's shall we read together Mark chapter 6, verse 45 to 53. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed. They had not understood about the loaves, their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. I'd also like to read a little bit here from Matthew. We're going to read a little bit from Matthew chapter 14, because Mark gives us some of the story, but not all of it. And I want to fill in a little bit of the gap there about what happens. And this is recorded in Matthew. It says in Matthew chapter 14, verse 28 to 31, while they're on the water in the boat and Jesus appears. Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." I'm not going to go through the rest of that story of Matthew there. You know what happens, obviously, to Peter. But I want us to think about this scene for a minute at the beginning. You have Jesus sending his disciples off in a boat without him. He is staying behind. That doesn't sound good. Is Jesus just kind of leaving them? Matthew clarifies that by saying, when evening came, Jesus was there alone. But the boat was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against them. It definitely seems like Jesus just let them go. So here in Mark, here's the scene. We have Jesus is on the side, and we have the disciples in the middle of an 8-mile wide lake, struggling to go absolutely anywhere because the wind and the waves are against them. The waves keep shoving the boat all over the place. Jesus watched them go. He is not with them, and the disciples are having a miserable time. Actually, it's nighttime. The disciples are trying to row. Have you ever rowed? Like, rowing is hard work. It's really, really hard. Good for your shoulders, but it's really, really hard work. This is a nightmare trip. This is exhausting. They're tired. Jesus is not there, and the disciples are buffeted about in a boat by wind and waves. Does Jesus not even see? Does he not realize? Look closely at Mark chapter 6, verse 47 and 48. It says here, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Did you notice that? Jesus is at the evening, the boat is in the middle of the lake, and Mark records Jesus saw them. He saw the disciples struggling against the wind and the waves. They were in the middle of the lake, which is about 8 miles wide, as I said, and Jesus sees them. So in the evening, the disciples are struggling, but Jesus is seeing them and well aware of them, very well aware of them. He does see them. For some reason, despite definitely seeing them, he knows they're there. Jesus doesn't go out to them until the 4th watch of the night, which is kind of like 3 o'clock in the morning, our time onwards, somewhere between 3 and dawn. It's like Jesus sees them struggling and just knew. He doesn't rescue them. He doesn't stop them struggling. He doesn't go out to them. He just sees it, is well aware of it, and lets it be. I wonder maybe if this is a little bit like when, as a parent, you have kind of half an eye on your children all the time. Or maybe you always know kind of what they're doing, especially if they're up to mischief. You're well aware of it, and you don't even have to be in the same room. You kind of let them go, you let them grow, but you know exactly what they're doing, and you know what's going on. Funny thing is, Mark says in the evening the disciples were halfway across the lake, 8 miles. And John's Gospel reports that in the 4th watch, when they had rowed 3.5 miles, the disciples saw Jesus approaching, walking on the water. So in the evening, Mark's Gospel records they were 3.5 miles into the lake, and John's Gospel on the 4th watch of the night says they're halfway across, or 3.5 miles in. So the disciples have been rowing from evening till around 3 in the morning or more. They have been rowing for at least 6 hours and have gone absolutely nowhere. They have traveled nothing, not anything. 6 hours of rowing and they haven't traveled anywhere. Can you imagine? Can you imagine rowing for 6 hours and you haven't traveled? I mean, rowing for, I don't know if I have rowed. I have rowed. It's really hard. Rowing for half an hour, you wake up the next day and you're sore. They had been rowing for 6 hours against the wind and against the waves, and they have gone nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. This is bad. This is really bad. They're exhausted. They're stressed. They're tired. It's black. I think maybe this sets the scene for what happens next. Stressed, tired, frustrated, exhausted disciples. And what we see is Jesus now walking out to them on the lake. The Bible doesn't record how they saw him, whether he glowed or whether it was closer to dawn. But they can see something is coming out towards them, and they see, and they are absolutely terrified. The disciples are terrified. This was real fear. This was panic. I mean, they think this is a ghost. They are really scared. I don't know. I mean, I talked earlier about being on the roller coaster, and I was scared. I was really scared. I was scared enough to get off, but there's a kind of different kind of fear when you're really afraid and you are crying out to the Lord. I don't know if you've maybe experienced that or not in your life. I have. When I was younger, my stepdad was an alcoholic, and he could get pretty violent when he was drunk, and we never knew, from one day, I guess, to the next. We didn't know what we were going to get. We didn't know if things would be fine or not fine. And, I was afraid all of the time. I mean, I would call out to the Lord all of the time. All of the time. I mean, because that is where I could seek refuge. And if you're afraid, if you've been in a situation sort of similar to that, you know what fear is. It's real, and you can't just turn it off. But Jesus knows the fear of the disciples. He realizes it, and he says something really cool. He says, take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. Those are some of the best words ever. Jesus is saying, it's me. Don't be afraid. How awesome is that? It's like on Easter morning, when Mary is there and she sees someone and she doesn't know and she's scared, and Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's me. I'll come back to that in a minute. I just read what happens at that moment from Matthew, where Peter gets out of the boat. And what we do is we think to ourselves, well, that's really cool, but did you ever think to yourself, how did Peter walk on the water? How? Maybe some of you can relate. Can you float? Perhaps some of you can float. Maybe in your house you're able to discern and you know who can float, perhaps in a sea or a swimming pool or a lake. You just kind of lie there and on your back and you're floating. Can you float? Can all of you float? For those of you that can float, what do you do? How do you do it? And for those of you that can't float, I cannot float. I can't float. Why not? Why can't I float? Well, why can my brother float and I can't float? I can't. There's something about it. My dad would say to me, well, you just got to relax. I can't relax. You lie down and my body just starts to sink. Well, that's enough. And that's it. As soon as I start to sink just that little bit, that's enough for me. And I start to sink. I just go. I cannot relax. Some of you might be able to relate to that. You're just, ugh. And some of you are just, no worries. Just float. I know that it's possible to float. I've seen people float. They just lie there. Often we think this story is sometimes just about faith, and it is about faith, Peter's faith. But I want you to see something else. Jesus specifically said, do not be afraid. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Well, to float on water, you must be completely relaxed. You simply cannot float unless you allow yourself to relax and be at rest. I am absolutely convinced that Peter went from absolute fear to absolute peace. Absolute fear to absolute peace. Look at verse 30. It says here in Matthew, verse 30. I'll read it out to you. It says, Peter got down out of the boat. It says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink. Well, that means when he wasn't seeing the wind, he wasn't afraid. It was the fear that caused him to sink. In other words, while Peter was walking to Jesus, while his eyes were on Jesus, while he was focused on Jesus, he was not afraid at all. He was at complete and absolute peace. No matter what was going on around him, Peter was at peace. He was, in essence, floating on water. Now, I'm not going into the science of that, but spiritually speaking, Peter was floating on water. He was at complete peace. What caused Peter to go from absolute terror? He's seeing a ghost and he's exhausted and he's had no sleep, to complete peace just like that. The middle of the buffeting and the waves, complete peace. Well, it would seem to us that Peter heard the voice of Jesus. He heard Jesus call to him, and he was in the presence of Jesus. The voice of Jesus and the presence of Jesus led to absolute peace. Jesus himself became Peter's peace in a scary, in a difficult and even a terrifying situation, Jesus became Peter's complete and absolute calm assurance, no matter what was going on around. That brings me back to my original question. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning, I asked you and I said, why do you think peace is a fruit of the Spirit? Well, peace is itself bound up completely in Jesus. Completely. That's why it's a fruit of the Spirit. You see, all of the fruits of the Spirit are bound up absolutely and completely in God himself. We say God is love, and we know what we mean by that. But all of the fruits of the Spirit are completely bound up in him. They're a reflection of him. Wherever Jesus is, there is peace. There must be peace, because it is bound up in him. Wherever he is, he brings peace. Jesus is peace. So I've got two more practical points, just two or more practical points for you just in conclusion. Bring this Sunday school to an end, but it's interesting to me first that Jesus allowed the disciples to go into the rough waters. He knew them, he saw them, and he did not go out to them until later. The disciples were stressed and exhausted, buffeted by waves for hours, 6 or more hours struggling to row, and Jesus still didn't go out to them. Not the first, the second, the fourth, 6 or at least hours. But he was very, very well aware of them. He did not abandon them. He didn't leave them. He saw them. In the same way, some extremely, extremely stressful, difficult situations are around us today. Maybe we're in trouble now. Maybe we're really stressed. Maybe we are going through times, I don't know, but we are definitely in some very, very, very rough waters. And in the same way that Jesus saw and was very well aware of his disciples, so is Jesus, the God of the universe, very well aware of us, very well aware. He is very well aware of me, and he's very well aware of you. He does not abandon you. Take it to heart that Jesus sees you. In Genesis 16, verse 13, God is given a name. He is the God who sees. Hagar says, "You are the God who sees." Remember that name, because Jesus is the God who sees. The last thing I want you to look at is in Mark chapter 6, verse 45 and verse 53. I'm going to read verse 45 here. It says, "Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of them to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd." Well, now, let's go to verse 53. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. Did you catch that? When they got into the boat, Jesus told them to go to Bethsaida. When they landed, they were at Gennesaret. It's like Jesus told them to go somewhere through the rough seas and rough times and took them out on the other side to somewhere completely different than where they had intended to go. I don't know what that means exactly or why, but it is very clear to me that Jesus was in absolute, complete control all of the time. Maybe we're like that today. Maybe the United States is like that. Maybe we are headed in a direction that we had not intended to go. Maybe we're going somewhere that we don't really know where we're ending up. Maybe our lives are like that. Maybe they're in upheaval and we're in a storm and we're headed in a destination, but we're ending up somewhere we had not intended to go. If so, let the Lord talk to your heart today. Let Jesus' voice and his presence still your spirit. Let us not be afraid if we're going somewhere we did not intend to go. Jesus knows where we are going and is not surprised in the slightest. I want you to catch this. Notice how Jesus managed to meet them in the middle of the lake. Imagine that. Now for a minute, imagine this is pitch black. The boat has been buffeted by wind and waves for 6 hours at least. Backwards and forwards. It's not traveled anywhere. It's just blown all over the place. Jesus has no flashlight, no radar, no GPS, no electricity, no anything. And he goes out there and he knows exactly where they are to walk past them. Imagine telling that to someone. Go out in the lake. You'll find a boat out there somewhere. It's been drifting for 6 hours, but you'll find it. It is not an accident that Jesus was going to walk right past them. He knew exactly where they were, even though the disciples were going somewhere completely different than where they had intended. Jesus knew where they were all of the time, and Jesus knows where we are. Jesus knows where you are. Jesus knows where the United States is, buffeted by some serious storms. But Jesus hasn't abandoned us and doesn't not know where I am and doesn't not know where you are. We might be in the pitch black and we might be really buffeted, but Jesus knows where I am. And maybe as all of us are heading in an uncertain direction, maybe with a very great deal of buffeting and even more struggles to come, maybe we can try to be a little bit more like Peter and listen to the voice and stay in the presence of Jesus. He himself will be our peace. There's 2 verses I want to leave you with today, and we'll finish it there. Mark chapter 6, verse 50 says, they were all terrified. Terrified. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid. He said, take courage. I am here. When you're afraid, who do you want with you? I want Jesus. Genesis 15 verse 1. Do not be afraid, God said to Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I will be your shield, your very great reward. May the Lord bless you today. I'm going to close in prayer. We'll finish it there. But may the Lord bless you. Let's just close in prayer, shall we? Lord, I'd like to pray for anyone watching the video today. I don't know what their life situation is. Maybe everything's fine. Maybe they're very stressed. Maybe they've been made unemployed. Maybe they're in leadership and just don't know what to do. I don't know, Lord. I know that you are the God of the universe, and that you are the God who sees, and that you are the God who knows exactly where we are, even though it's pitch black all around and nobody else knows. You have not abandoned us. You have not turned away from us. We might be going somewhere we didn't even know we were going. Please, please, please have mercy on us. Please, please would you bless our nation. Please, please bless those that are listening today. Have mercy on them. Reveal yourself to them. Please, please would you be our shield. Would you be our rock. Would you please be our very great reward. We just commit ourselves to you, Lord Jesus, and ask for your face, please, to shine upon us. In your name, amen. That's it. Let me finish it there. I do hope each one of you has a tremendous and excellent week. God bless all of you.